Hi, uh, I'm John, and this is my channel. And today I am working on chapter 2 of a story I have been working. And we're just going to let you look over my shoulder as I edit, and we'll see how that goes. So, chapter 2, Boron in the Desert. It took Boron some time to figure out the best way to walk through deep sands. It was difficult going. The path of least resistance was to try to avoid climbing the dunes, but Boron knew so the should be that. That was a good way to lose your direction. Boron traveled directly west, staying true to his internal compass. Most sand dunes were about 10 to 15 feet high, but sometimes he had to climb tall ones. The night air was as cold as he expected. There was no moon that night, but the stars were bright enough for Boron. His eyes were keen and his other senses of similar quality. There wasn't much to hear, just the gentle breeze that slid by him as he walked. It wasn't enough to kick up the sand, although Boron still covered his face with a bandana from his traveling outfit. There was no point in breathing dust. As he walked, Boron thought about his time with the dwarves. Should probably be lowercase. As he walked, Boron thought about his time with the dwarves. He missed his dwarf friends. He had lived with them for almost 300 years, living the simple life of mining, farming, and building. They had taught him so much. Over time, he had grown to look like them. And at some point, after 100 years or so, they had mostly, it should not be even, it should be mostly. He had mostly forgotten he wasn't a dwarf. He had done everything the other dwarf men had done, except for marry and have children. Somewhere, deep inside of himself, he had known that would never work for him. No matter how much he had sunk into life as a dwarf, he had never found himself attracted to other dwarves in that way. They were his friends, but he felt nothing in that way. Yeah, that way twice. So let's try that one. So let's go back. No matter how much he had sunk into life as a dwarf, he had never found himself attracted to other dwarves. They were his friends, but he felt nothing in that way. Perhaps it was because he wasn't a dwarf, but perhaps it ran deeper than that. Luckily, he had never been handsome, and few had approached him at all. That had made things easier. At this point now, Boron walked until the sun started to rise behind him. As he felt the first rays on his back, he started to look for something like a shelter. It took another hour of walking until he spotted a rock spire rising up in the distance. It took another hour of walking to reach it. And that should be by then. By then, the heat was rising again. He set up his small camp on a bit of flat rock in the shadow of the spire. He decided against a fire and instead ate a slice of dwarf cake and washed it down with some water. He was very thirsty, but he knew the water was best consumed in sips. There was no telling how far this desert would stretch, and Boron had never died of dehydration before, so there was no telling what his endurance might be. Boron got his tent and slept. His bedroll was somewhat thin, but Boron had no real trouble sleeping on rock. It was relatively flat, and his dense body rarely felt anything as minor as the pressure of a small stone. Boron slept for a good 8 hours before the heat got to him. Boron slept for a good 8 hours before the heat got to him. By then, his tent was no longer in the shadows, and the sun was already working its way down, though there were still a few hours to go before nightfall. Boron moved his little camp into the shade and sat for an hour or two, waiting for the heat to let up. He ate again, drank as little as he would allow himself, and took another short nap. Finally, about an hour before the sun would be down, Boron set off again. He had finished one water bag so far, with 2 more left. The second night of walking seemed a bit easier. The sand dunes were a little lower, but still significant, and he had gotten the hang. Of how to walk more lightly on them. Twice, though, he had found himself sinking too deeply into the sand and had to calm down and dig himself out carefully. As the sun came up that day, there was no firm shelter to be seen. He walked well into the morning, getting hotter, and finally had to pitch. Oh, I really went south here. Pitch his tent on a relatively flat area of sand with little protection from the sun. It was a hot day, and Boron had trouble sleeping. The wind picked up at one point, and his tent, poorly anchored in the soft sand, came up. He managed to get things back down. Consequently, he headed out earlier in the day that time and drank more of his water than he would have liked. By nightfall, he had finished his second bag of water, leaving him just one. Boron walked all the way through the night again. If anything, the sand dunes seemed taller and the going was harder. By the end of the night, he was down to half a bag of water. As the sun came up, though, he thought he spotted something in the distance. There seemed to be a small, unbroken line on the horizon. Boron continued walking. He had to turn a bit to the north now instead of heading straight west, but he was excited. The town meant water and food. As he got closer, though, he realized there was nothing moving in this town. He could make out several buildings on the other side of the wall, but he saw no one and no flags. He heard nothing either. Let's take out the either. He heard nothing. By the time he reached the city wall, the sun was high in the sky. He scaled the wall with relative ease, since the sand had piled almost to the top of it. He dropped to the other side and looked around. There were about 30 buildings. Many were small, the size of homes, but one was much larger. They were made of, let's go with the buildings. The buildings were made of carved stone, thick and unyielding. The stone was almost the color of sand, and Boron wondered how many people had passed by without ever noticing. Boron looked for a well. There was one near the center of town. He uncovered the top and found that there was still a bucket he could lower down. Although the rope was a bit frayed, it seemed to hold the bucket. Let's start this as a new sentence. Although the rope was a bit frayed, it seemed to hold the bucket, at least when it was empty. Boron lowered the bucket. Boron lowered the bucket down. There was never a satisfying splash of the bucket hitting water, but it did eventually strike the bottom. Boron raised the bucket again. There was no water, but there was a bit of mud on the bottom of the bucket. Start this new paragraph. This is a bit long. Boron smiled. A bit was a start. Boron checked out the sides of the well and found that there were handholds carved into the rock. He took a drink from his final, mostly empty water bag. Had a slice of dwarf cake. Had a slice of dwarf cake. He was too tired to do anything now, but tonight he would fix things. Boron picked one of the small houses and went inside. There was still a woven mat on the floor. Boron spread his sleep sack on top of it, made a pillow out of his towel, and fell asleep within moments. The sun was already down by the time he awoke. Boron felt much better than he had before, though. Do I need to though? Yeah, let's get that. The sun was already down by the time he awoke. Boron felt much better than he had before. He took another drink from his water bag. It was nearly empty now, but Boron was less worried. This was a problem that could be solved by digging, and he had spent over 200 years digging. A pick would have been nice, and that probably should be 300 years. A pick would have been nice, but his small shovel and the bucket would do the job. Boron checked the rope that held the bucket. Boron checked the rope that held the bucket. It had clearly seen better days, but it could hold some weight. Boron pulled out his ball of string and sewing kit from his backpack and wound the string around and through the rope, strengthening it. It would be slow going, but Boron was sure it would work out. Boron lowered the bucket. Then he climbed down to the bottom of the well. It was over 30 feet down. When he got to the bottom and put his feet out, they encountered a thick mud. Boron took his small shovel and filled up the bucket, then climbed back up, pulled up the bucket, and emptied it out about 5 feet from the well. He then lowered the bucket down and went down for round 2. It was hard work, but Boron was strong and durable. Kept it up throughout the night. By the end of the night, he had brought up 26 buckets of mud. The bottom was still muddy, but it was much more watery mud, and the air in the well felt moist now. He couldn't quite fill up his water bag yet, but he felt like another day would do it. Boron went back to sleep in the little house he had picked out the first night. He slept a long, deep sleep. Boron got up late in the afternoon. He didn't want to start until the sun went down, so he lingered slowly over his dwarf cake. Case that. And the last dregs of his water. He got up and wandered around the abandoned town. Most of the houses had been stripped of anything valuable. There was also occasional graffiti on the walls, most of it along the lines of "Stanford was here," or "This was the place of the dead, beware of ghosts." Most of it along the lines of "Stanford was here," or "This was the place of the dead, and beware of ghosts." Boron had been here for well over a day. He didn't get to see any ghosts. He hadn't seen anything giving either. Even the well was, living. He hadn't seen anything living either. Even the well was clear of insects. He went to the biggest building, and though it had suffered a lot of damage, Boron was pretty sure it had been barracks for whatever group had held this place. Everything was picked over, though. There was little of value. As night fell, Boron went back to work on the well. He followed the same pattern as the day before. Lower the bucket, climb down, fill the bucket with mud, climb back up, then raise and empty the bucket. It took most of the night, but by the time he was finished, he was waist deep in water. The first bucket of water up was muddy, but Boron ran the water through some cloth into his little pot, then boiled it. Once it was cool enough, he drank the water. It wasn't refreshing, but it was enough for now. Boron boiled the second pot, then left it to cool and went to sleep. By the next night, the water in the well had settled, so it was pretty clear. Boron boiled it pot by pot, let it cool, then filled his bags. It was a slow process, but Boron was not in a tremendous hurry. Let's just take out tremendous. But Boron was not in a hurry. He figured he would sleep here again, then set out the next night. While he was waiting for the water to boil each time, he wandered around the abandoned town. Many of the buildings were completely empty, but some seemed to have been left somewhat the way they had originally been. Boron found clay pots and small glass. Let's take out the comma. Boron found clay pots and small glass vials, all empty. He found dolls made out of small sacks of sand. He found a mortar and pestle, both made of hard stone. He even found a few coins, mostly copper or zinc, with odd faces on them he did not recognize. At one point, he found a book, but he did not recognize the language, and it was falling apart anyway. He collected the paper because paper always came in handy while you were traveling. As the sun came up, Boron climbed on top of the tallest building and had a look around. He was sure that if there had been a town, there had been a road. The sand had surely buried it, but there was still the chance that there was some remnants. He eventually spotted what looked like the likeliest spot. An area where the dunes seemed a bit smaller on average, in a line that moved mostly west, but a bit to the south. Boron decided that was what he would follow the next day. Okay, so thanks for bearing with me. That was kind of just me reading through, correcting any minor spelling mistakes and grammar errors and things like that. I'm probably now going to look at this and see if there's anything I want to add, anything I want to remove and such, but first was the basic read through. So thanks for bearing with me. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe.